Welcome to a true spiritual adventure story like the world has never known. Volume 2, Rise of the First World Teacher, with your host, Dr. James Yogadi Weldon. Sharing the continuing story from my autobiography. This is book 2 in that journey, entitled The Rise of the First World Teacher. This is chapter 3. And the title of that chapter is Going Home to India. So as usual, there's a poem at the beginning of this chapter 3. Going home. I'm going home. Oh, India, you are in my blood and in my soul. A moment becomes a year. That becomes a decade. That becomes a lifetime. That becomes an eon. But now I see it was only a moment ago that I was home. You know, now at this point, almost 15 years have passed since the earlier part of this book was written. And really a number of years of cooking that I needed to go through. And in 1993, I make my first trip to India. And it's so amazing that now, after all of these years, I'm about to visit India for the first time. How can it be that so many decades had passed? And for my entire life, I followed the spiritual teaching of that great country, which extends actually all up into Pakistan. And there were great seers and knowers, you know, all up in Tibet and all over. You know, I'm in love with the country, yet all these years now, after 25 years, I'm actually going home. And the invitation comes about as we stand in line with many people to say hello to Sri Sri Ravi Shankar during a week-long course, advanced course in California. And I'm standing in line behind my wife, Lynn, at that time. And we're wearing big smiles on our faces because, you know, we're thinking we're going to ask if we can make the trip and travel with him for some time, perhaps afterwards. And we sing and dance, and, you know, there's a few hundred of us that are on the course out in California at that time. And all this week we enjoyed knowledge and silence and meditation. And as we move closer person by person, we thank him for what has happened in these last few years. And he turns and says to me after we make a request, says, oh Yogadi, why don't you come for the Navaratri celebration? Come on. And over the next few weeks, you know, we make our arrangements, we find a flight, check to see if there's anything we need to do health-wise. From friends over the years, we hear about possibly health concerns. Should we get shots? We take those, but we find out that they're really unnecessary. You know, boarding the plane, I think back to my first flight overseas to become a meditation teacher 25 or so years earlier. In many ways, this adventure is reminiscent of that trip. And I wonder what amazing things will happen in this mystic land, of which is the home of so many of the world's spiritual traditions for so many thousands of years. And the flight is really long, about 24 hours. And the most reasonable is to fly nonstop overnight and stop overnight halfway, but we don't know that yet. And during the duration of our flight is more than 24 hours because we fly straight through from point to point. No layovers except to stop and get, you know, some gas. We arrive in Delhi in a brain fog in the middle of the night, and we still have to wait some hours for our final leg to go to Bangalore. But as soon as we arrive in Delhi, amazingly, the whole atmosphere and behavior of everyone changes. At first, I noticed that, you know, everyone is really orderly waiting in line for almost, in the United States, for almost anything. Those lines disappear. because of the much larger population in India, the Western protocols of, nice straight lines and personal space, they almost disappear. Immediately stepping off the plane, all these aromas of curried food, they hit us. At this late hour, the airport is empty, but the vendors are still there. And if we had planned ahead, we would have found a hotel to stay at, but I didn't plan. So we choose to stay at the airport through the rest of the night. And when I step out of the building, I'm completely barraged by requests to avail us of the service of taxis and baggage handlers. And even at 4 o'clock in the morning, when we arrive, there's a significant crowd of people waiting for customers. No, thank you. No, thank you. I say a dozen times on the way out, but almost everyone speaks very clear English, but with a distinct kind of British flavor. And the atmosphere at this time of the day was humid but cool. And I really relished the exotic sights and feelings of India again. You can tell I love that country. I absolutely adore India. In that whole region of the world, I would say I'm a little biased, of course. But I realized at that moment that I'm now completely on the other side of the world where I live in Colorado. And I've been in love with the mountains of Colorado for so many years. And now I know why it is, because of that earlier past life, which I talked about in my first book, in Tibet. Recently, that life and now others, many others in some cases, have become much clearer. During that lifetime, how do you know? I don't know, you just know. How do you remember what happened last week or last month? We are actually protected from remembering many of these things. But it's really true, we're all amnesiacs. We've forgotten our backgrounds, our real history. At that time, in that life, I headed a small spiritual community actually in Tibet. I didn't know at that time but where it was, but now I do. Unable to protect them from all the invading, the Chinese, I actually died in a prison in a very difficult situation after being captured for the crime of, quote, smuggling. It appears that I had run some kind of underground railroad, an escape route for some people, goods, especially those wanting to leave the country and escape the potential brutality of the Chinese invading. And the community I live near is near the border, and the Chinese constantly looked for an excuse to invade the country. And for many years, the Chinese claimed Tibet as part of their country. And over the years, they became increasingly aggressive towards anyone disputing the view. Most of you know this story. And it's well known that the people in Tibet held a position in opposition to the Chinese. Because of my love for that community and desire to help in that life, I want to help those people escape. And I returned in this time again and again to take small groups of individuals over the passes into the neighboring countries. There's much more to this story, but I'm not going to talk about it now. A lot more has become clear over the years. Of course, I can't convince everyone to leave. Even after imploring them again and again, relatively few choose to leave their homes and possessions, even though clearly all of our lives are really at risk. Many residents do not understand until the invading armies, kind of march into our town on that fateful day, around the time that I was captured as well. I know now that in that life that what I'm clinging to is going to perish. And in that time, again, this is an earlier time, we know of some of the past karma of the ancestral generations of those living in Tibet. And in an earlier time, in an earlier age, many of the individuals now living in those mountain communities, invaded parts of China and, burned and looted parts of that country. Certainly the case that I lived nearby in those times as well. But we believe at this time, before the Chinese invaded, that we could protect the country because of our spiritual traditions. And the effect of those actions could be mitigated. It'd be a lot less. And in that life, my body perished there with some extreme pain. And those memories were hidden for many years, even with my deep meditation skills, even with the flashbacks I had as a child. And through the practice of meditation and the spiritual energy released within me in this life in America, I clean up my mind, but my heart still longs for the high spiritual home in the mountains. And this is why even from my childhood, I was building tree houses, places, retreats. And for so many years, my wife and I searched for a place in the mountains where we could complete, perhaps recreate something from that life in Tibet. And upon our arrival in Colorado, for the first time, we traveled all around the state in our little bitty RV looking for the best place to locate the center of those lifelong dreams. I had no money, I had no means, no capabilities, but we went for it anyway. And in the last 3 months of our travels, a friend of mine, his name was John McAfee, who founded the antivirus software, he owned a huge property near Colorado Springs. That attracted my attention. And I met him, and he actually offered me a 40-acre plot of land in a beautiful location overlooking Pikes Peak near Colorado Springs for such a facility. And I asked some of the senior teachers at the Art of Living, what should I do with this offer? I don't get a clear answer because I didn't realize at that time that nobody was in charge. It wasn't so organized. That's also one reason I decided to go to India, is to ask Sri Sri whether I should proceed with this project. Because such a center has been chasing me, my dreams, literally for decades. And I feel that my destiny is someday to create such a center again. But now I arrive in India, my spiritual home. After more than a full day's worth of travel, we arrive in Bangalore, almost exactly opposite from Colorado on the planet where we live. And exhaustion forces us to stay somewhere overnight to help reset our biological clocks. We don't know where to go, so we ask the clerk at the transportation desk to find us a room. And the agent books us into a Holiday Inn. After making our way out of the airport to the taxi and facing the mob of people wanting to carry our bags, help us take us places, we're on our way. How can I describe how India was affecting me? India certainly is a land of contrast everywhere you go. One moment, at this time, you could pass a palatial wedding mansion and see beauty and art everywhere around the corner. And the next moment, we drive past an incredible temple where many people have been praying, perhaps for thousands of years. Short distances from that are beggars and mothers with children in their arms, literally on the streets. When our taxi stops at a street light, they come asking for a handout. The best that I can say is that India brims with organized chaos. Every corner is a universe in itself. Those of you that haven't been there, you really should go and see some of this. Canned cows are wandering along in the dark, dogs are barking, more motorcycles carrying whole families, and tiny three-wheelers or taxis are buzzing in every direction. Hundreds of small stall shops selling everything imaginable line the roads. Beggars tap on your window with a smile. And even if you give them nothing, they're happy to receive anything. India is certainly a land of contrast. At that time, it's better now. The roads are crazy and bumpy and full of potholes. Thank you for all the good work you've done on the road since then, by the way. On the busy streets, the pollution at that time was overwhelming. To me, it was beautiful beyond description. In spite of the chaos, our driver turns on the air conditioning and immediately the air in the taxi clears. Something very, very old is enlivened by these scenes. And in a few moments, we arrive at the Holiday Inn, and the porters immediately unload our bags from the taxi. One man holds the door and two more take our bags. and another supervisor watches to make sure everything is done correctly. And besides the large Indian population everywhere, because of that, there's help everywhere. Porters are all dressed in sharp red and white uniforms. The doorman sports a huge curled mustache and wears a bright turban with spokes of color flowing in all directions. It's so interesting. Coming to India is like stepping into another universe. And as we step up the marble steps into our hotel and down into the luxury lobby, I peered down the hallway into the hotel's interior. Less than 50 feet away, I see a bald man in red and ochre robes looking at me, smiling, looking right at me. Time totally freezes. Oh my God, I wonder. I recognize this man. I know this man. This is the Dalai Lama. I know him. Although I don't remember yet the details, we hadn't personally met in my lifetime. His simple face and smiling, the glasses, his demeanor, the strength, and the wisdom of that tradition. I know this energy really very well. Literally, I arrive in India, I walk in the door, and I literally almost fall into the arms of the Dalai Lama. There he is, right there. Synergy. And Sri told me a little bit about that Tibetan tradition, and that it carries huge power behind it. And he says that although tens of thousands, like myself, lose their lives with the Chinese occupation, the work of these lamas actually continues also from the other side and caused the worldwide explosion of Tibetan Buddhism. And now I know that I'm one of those many who lost their lives in Tibet and scattered throughout the world in our next life. And this hidden trauma is one of the reasons that I actually wait so many years to come back to that part of the world. I wonder at my great fortune to arrive in India for the first time and walk right into the Dalai Lama. What are the chances of that happening by accident? This is beyond mere coincidence. Nature has arranged this meeting to renew our relationship. Of course, there are no coincidences in life. The big consciousness is constantly arranging such circumstances in our lives to maximize our lessons. Sometimes those lessons are enjoyable. Sometimes they're painful. But now I know they're always the lessons we need to receive. Not easy for people to accept, but as the Dalai Lama and I step towards each other, we both fold our hands in namaste in the Tibetan fashion, and we bow almost with our heads touching. And a timeless span opens between us. And in a flash of awareness, something unmistakable passes between us. Grace, recognition, remembrance, and much more pass in silence. Wow. And the next moment, he's out the door and gone. What an incredible moment this is. I've seen this kind of transference before. This is soul-to-soul communication. Instant, full, complete knowingness. And Sri had been doing this to me for some years now. And I wonder about these moments and try to make sense of what I saw there for the next few hours. How can it be that so much can be communicated in such a small amount of time? We live this worldly life believing that this is all that we are and forget that we're really cosmic beings. We're like the mountain ranges hidden in the fog with only the tiniest tip of that mountain available. That small tip is like knowing only one life. We don't realize so much is hidden behind so many of our encounters, each encounter. We really go back forever and forward forever in time. And being in India again for this time, that timeless dimension opened to me immediately. And I sleep that night restfully, wrapped in the grace of India. This morning we awake, and after breakfast, we find a three-wheeler and head out, actually the 23 kilometers ride down a road in Bangalore called Kanakapura Road to the Art of Living Ashram Retreat Center. And as we travel along, I look down each and every street. You feel the energy of that place. And the energy rises until I sense that just down the street and around the corner is an old temple. How do I know these things? I don't know. But I do. And I wonder if this intuition is really true. And I say, stop. I ask him to stop, stop. And I shout out, wait a minute, stop, stop. I want to go down there and look. You know, perhaps my intuition is true, perhaps it's not. But I want to know. And I get out and walk down the lane and turn a few steps on the corner. And sure enough, in India, I feel all of these divine places where so much devotion and love by multiple traditions is experienced. I see that this hidden love is really the strength of the country. And the foundation of all the spiritual abundance of that country, from my point of view, is that very ancient love. India is one of the world's most invaded countries. In spite of surviving so many armies and experiencing more diversity than virtually any country in the world, the heart of India continues to flourish. And it's certainly doing so now. With so many languages, so many practices, so many religions, India's people have always found a way to live together in harmony. It isn't that there haven't been some problems. Obviously there are. When will we learn that kind of acceptance? I'm hoping someday it will come to the West as well. So down the bumpy road in a rickety three-wheeler, we're going to that retreat center, that ashram in 1993 now. And as we arrive at the ashram, we unload our bags at the gate. And there are mystical symbols and carvings over the gate of the arch. This is the old entrance now, those of you that know that place. I look out the land for me for the first time, and it's absolutely wild and untamed. It's totally a jungle with a few buildings hiding here and there. And it's not the organized place I expected. There's a picture in the book here. You know, wild trees grow in every direction. Bushes sprout in every direction. Ants are crawling across the road in every direction. A few birds here and there. Yes, I feel a very powerful energy. But there's something untamed, something primordial I'm feeling that lives there. You know, arriving at your ashram, I feel like, for me, it's like Christmas and all of the holidays in the West are arriving literally in the jungle at the same moment. And I feel special excitement, enthusiasm that something wondrous is coming. As I drop my bags, I'm going to drop my judgments, as if just being there is enough. And I do feel the energy of the enlightened being who lives there, and much more. That high spiritual consciousness is permeating everything. And as we settled into the ashram, you know, I learned about the schedule. It's a combination of a lot of hard work and a lot of play. And there's really no requirement to do everything, but we understand that we're all here for a higher purpose. In our life in the world, we work so hard every day to make a living, to create a life of wealth that allows us to have the kind of lifestyle we want. But the question is, do we really live what is important in our life, in our day-to-day life? The reality is that often we spend many years preparing for that kind of deep, meaningful life, but we never actually live it. It always seems that we're chasing something we think will make a difference, crave that car, that new job, marriage, because we believe that if we just have that next item, somehow it will make us happy. It is like spending one's entire life, making our bed, but never sleeping in it. In this environment, at that retreat center, at that ashram, the entire purpose is to gain knowledge and then rest in complete acceptance and openness. These kind of homes and places, whatever you want to call them, it's a place to let go of your worries and cares in a really special, for me, holy place, and to contribute to the development of the community through some type of selfless service, which is called seva. Several days later, we go into an advanced meditation course for a week. So my wife and I are apart during that time. And my new single room was only a little tiny. It's about 6 feet by 6 feet. This is my room, 6 feet by 6 feet. It's just large enough to open the door and get into the bed. The space is not even large enough to hold my luggage. But I occupy it all by myself, which is unusual there to have my own room. And the walk from my room leads down a very long road at that time, about a mile from the main meditation hall. And the classes are held every day. Every day there's a celebration called a satsang, in which we sing and dance. And Sri Sri comes during the afternoons and the evenings to speak about whatever inspires him at the moment. And after these walks, I walk down a long road and look up at the stars. And I pinch myself thinking, wow, I'm really here. This is the place. Where else do I ever want to be? And my heart is full of contentment and satisfaction just to be there. As you might expect, these are the early days of the art of living and the growing foundation, which actually someday is going to be beyond what anything can really imagine. It's huge now. And he's very busy, even though a few hundred people have come and go at this time. This is including the people from the town. And he lives in a very small cabin called a kutir. And the hut consists of a really moderate living room, a private dining area, and a very small bathroom. And it's built, by those living at the ashram. This place, it's the Shakti Kutir. He's not there now, and he's in a bigger place. And it's built by us, by those that came before me, and as a work of love. Sometimes at night, we walk back to his kutir, and he meets a few people. And then we kind of hang out, and then he would come out on a little wooden chair after the few people had left, and we'd look at the stars and talk about the most amazing things. But no matter what happens, each evening I'm walking down that long, dimly lit road, following the illumination of my little flashlight, and I'm thinking about the things that he says that night and rejoice at being there at that particular time. Usually I see in that wild place small animals scurrying across the road. Even at that time, a cobra comes from time to time in those early days. Literally, you would see them sometimes. Not every day, but sometimes. But no one has ever bothered them somehow. And for me, there's an irresistible attraction around being with the enlightened consciousness like this. Somehow such beings carry a special magic, a special power that makes them, at least to me, completely irresistible. And I'm beginning to discover that every motion, every glance, there is something special that is being said to somebody. If you ever have the fortune to be with an awareness like that, if you have, you completely will understand what I'm talking about. And if you have yet to have such an experience, you should make an effort and take some time away so you can have this sense of what it is like. For me, in these early times, every particle of dust that rises from the shuffling of my feet in that dusty, it was really dusty, it was dusty at that time, was magical. For me, the air was magical, the buildings were magical, the food was magical, the people were magical. The whole place is magical. And most of all, my heart, which is full of the magic and the wonder of love. This is what I want for you. This is what I want for the entire world. And the whole purpose of my story, which was held back for many years, is really to help you understand that that possibility is there also for you. Continuing to share this adventure story. Join me again and come back again to hear more stories. From now on, it's going to be absolutely chock full of just amazing, amazing stories. Just to help you understand that these are possibilities for your life. Have a wonderful day. Go out and do some good in the world, however you can. Namaste. Thanks for joining us in our YouTube channel, books, podcast episodes on living the enlightened life, and autobiography with your host, Dr. James Yogati Weldon.